Okay, we are back. Welcome, everyone. Just a little test. Do we have students in the room? Yes. Entrepreneurs? Game specialists? Yep, so a mismatch. Okay, so we have the pleasure to welcome Liko-Paul Pinsonnault. Welcome in Charleroi. And you are going to talk to us about your journey in simulation tech, so invisible tech that are surrounding games, I think, and also about your job, which I think your parents think it's now a respectful one, if I'm well. And also, you are going to talk to us about how you have been building the indie studio, which is dedicated to collectible miniatures, if I'm right. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, let's get this going. So, this already switched. All right, stay hungry, stay foolish. So these were the parting words of Steve Jobs' commencing speech at Stanford in 2005. And it's also the year that I started in the industry. Coincidence? Most likely. But these are sort of words that have struck me when I heard that speech the first time. And they have stayed with me throughout my career. So for me, staying hungry, it's this idea that, you want to learn, you want to keep pushing the boundaries, finding the new stuff, and always staying sort of on your tiptoe and not getting comfortable with your medium. And being foolish is that it's not just about engaging with those new and fresh ideas, it's about trying them. And sometimes they're silly, sometimes they don't work, sometimes they seem impossible, but that's where the real innovation and creativity happens. So for me, if you have only one lesson that you'll keep from this talk, is to stay hungry and stay foolish. And I want to thank the guys from Yellow Bricks for that intro. So we're pretty aligned on that. So today I'm going to be giving you a talk that's going to be a mix because there's a mix here in the room between students and professionals. So it's going to be a mix about my own journey and all the lessons that I have learned throughout that journey. So I'm not going to give you like my whole background in one shot. We're just going to go like pieces by pieces and learning to learning. And hopefully some of these will sort of resonate with you guys and you'll have takeaway whether you've been in industry for 25 years or you're just starting off and wondering what the hell am I talking about. So without further ado, let's do this. All right, first lesson, empathy is your mentor. And this really overlaps with the idea of staying curious and staying hungry. So when I started in the industry, I joined a company called Behavior Interactive today. They were called A2M before. And I joined as a physics programmer. And I got really lucky because actually the sole physics programmer had left. And then he had left for like many weeks. And they were stuck. And one friend over there called me and after I graduated from physics actually and said, we need somebody to program physics. There's not that many people in Montreal. You should try. So I faked my way in the interview. I didn't know how to program properly, but they took me anyway, and I got lucky. But when I came into the job, I was there. I was a new physics programmer. Everybody was really happy to just dump all the problems that were related to physics on my laps. And one of them was there was a game called Ed, Edd and Eddy Mischievous Adventure. That's the picture at the bottom there. And there was a bug. That game was shipping, in 3 weeks' time, and there was a bug where some of the characters would go through the floor. So it's pretty bad. And they were like, "This is a physics problem, and you're a physics programmer, so you should be fixing this." And now remember that I had faked my way into that interview. So what I did is that I started asking a lot of questions, like, what do you guys try? And I go on the floor and I talk to QA. What are the repro steps? We didn't have proper QA back then, so you had to quiz a lot of people to try and understand, when that occurred. And eventually figured out that there was a really good use case when these three characters, you could pile them up and they could pick up objects like that and be like a ladder. And then if you pick one of those objects, like a TV, you threw it on the wall and it bounced back on the character, the bottom character would just pop through the floor. And that only happened on the European version. So I was like, great, I got pieces there. But I still had no clue of why on that version. And it turns out that in Europe, at that time, TVs were running at 50 hertz. And we were running that game at half the frequency for that interlace. So for the kids back there, you could do that research. It's probably in some museum. And because of that, we were running effectively at like 25 frames per second. And if you dip below 20 frames per second, essentially the physics engine just misses collision points. So I figured all of that out, not on my own, not sitting behind my desk just trying to fix this bug, right? A lot of fixing that was talking to other people, understanding what they tried, and talking to the producer of like, what is special about this European version? And for me, that sort of became like part of the recipe of how I solved problem. So I solved that problem, and then I had less of an imposter syndrome, and I began my journey as a physics programmer, and I got to keep my job. But the key here is really empathy, right? So having empathy with that game production, I was part of a central tech team, having empathy that they're shipping, they're under stress, they need somebody to come and help them out, and by being having that curiosity and asking questions, that also, became part of the learnings that I took away, because that became my mentorship. So when you interact with people, you learn a lot, and this is really practical skills. And sometimes you learn to not apply your skills. So on the top picture there, that's on a game that I worked as well at Behavior. So this is a game called Wet, and there's a mode in Wet where in this acrobatic shooter, the hero goes into rage mode. When the hero goes into rage mode, she just kills everybody, like one shot gun, one shot sword. And I was a physics programmer, so that created a lot of ragdolls everywhere. So if you don't know what a ragdoll is, it's sort of a physical representation of your character, and then it could just fall on the ground. But it's pretty expensive computational-wise, right? And even if we were running this on next-gen consoles, that was the Xbox 360 and PS3, we still didn't have that firepower to sort of power all of these ragdolls at the same time as you're just plowing through tons of enemies. So in here was really trying to think outside the box, and because I was, helping the FX artists with their tools as well and their simulation, we were sort of bouncing ideas like, what can we do that's not a ragdoll? And we came up with this approach to create really cool effects that would not go into ragdoll, but in this mode, people would just like die and blast off with like this white blood kind of thing. And it was really stylized in that grindhouse and really fit. And at the same time, it sort of solved that performance problem because suddenly we're just spawning effects instead of spawning ragdolls. So, in this sense, it was really, again, engaging with other people that were not, physics programmer or programmers at all, and coming up with a solution where, we just remove physics from the problem. So the lesson here is that, if engage with the other people in your production team. In an indie team, that happens a lot because you're just a small team and wearing a lot of hats. But be curious about what they're trying to solve. I got lucky because as a physics programmer, it's a particular type of work where you have to engage with the entire pipeline of a game. So you're looking at assets creation, how they get into the game, how they're being consumed, how gameplay is using physics, all the way to like bugs and all of that. So because you cover a wide surface, you get to interact with a lot of people. So what happened to me in sort of an organic matter, so I got lucky because I got to practice this empathy muscle because it was part of my work. But when that didn't become my work, I kept that muscle going, and that has served me a lot. So you get specialized in some big companies, but it's something that today I'm very grateful because I started my own indie studio, and because I've learned a lot of how other people work and what they do and what they need. This helped me cover a lot of bases as well in our own indie studio. So talk to people, fix their problem, and you'll learn a lot. All right, Well, talking to people gets you to collaborate. And the next lesson here is that collaboration is not free. So after behavior in 2010, after almost 5 years of behavior, I joined Ubisoft. And I joined there because they started building their own physics engine. And this just never happens. Like, people buy physics engines, they don't build them. So this just happens once in a blue moon. That's how they sort of seduced me into going at Ubisoft. They're like, we're making a physics engine from scratch, and we want you to lead the team from Montreal. So I was super stoked. And when I joined the team, it was called Motion. The team was spread across 4 locations. So it was Montreal. We were just starting off. The main team was in Montpellier. So that's in France, south of France. Then we had, expert engineers in Kiev, Ukraine, and we also had tools specialists in Pune in India. So that was a first for me. It was like, okay, how do I manage a whole team that's spread across the world, different time zones, different cultures, and we all have to contribute to the same game engine? And it sort of happened that was the time as well as when Ubi was sort of getting really good at trying to scale their game. But we had to figure everything out. And one of the big things that we figured out is that it's just not free. Like, you can't just add more people to a problem and it will fix itself, right? And I could say that Ubisoft has sinned in that sense, pretty much. But it was left for the production team to try to figure out how to do things. So we partner up with people from Ghost Recon and Assassin's Creed, and trying to figure out what are the best practices and how do we make this happen. And eventually we found a way. And today a lot of those lessons are sort of fully integrated as we go and work remotely. A lot of those lessons are the same. But yeah, the practices that we started practicing at the micro level, so at a team level, on a game engine, very specific. So you're kind of all working on the same stuff. So that was like a particular challenge. And then all the way scaled up to something like an Assassin's Creed. So later at Ubisoft, I joined one of the Assassin's Creed. It was Unity, that's the one in Paris. And I joined that team as the lead engine programmer. So again, the lead engine programmer is one of those sort of heartbeat type work where you're responsible for the beat of the game and making sure that the health of the game is good, and also interacting with a lot of people in different time zones, because that affects the entire build. And that's where things got crazy. I thought it was big, but it got even bigger. But at that time, we were 800 on that team, spread across 10 studios. Different studios were specialists, others were making games. But essentially, it's the same lessons at a small scale that apply to big scale. And the key takeaway here is that it's not free. You got to make room in your planning if you're going to be collaborating to receive that collaboration, to examine or set expectations, and you need room as well for communication, for alignment. And I have found this to be true as well at the indie level for you guys, where let's say you're going to partner up with somebody to do the sound, right? So make sure that you have time to actually get the stuff back into the game, well integrated. And this is something that I see a lot of, even big productions, sometimes they forget, right? They just add more people, but they forget about the cost of just these people need to be aligned. They need to ask questions that will create some friction. So unsuccessful collaboration is that you don't plan ahead for that collaboration, and then it becomes just friction, and people are frustrated. Some people might produce something that never gets used, as an example. And on the flip side, if you do plan for it, and then you do manage those expectations and make room, then that collaboration will be successful, and you'll leverage actually, working with different teams, different people, or vendors outside. So it's not free, but if you plan for it, it can almost be free. So shameless plug, I did a talk at GDC in 2019 on the topic. It was called Cracking Collaboration. And this is, sort of the takeaway of the talk. It's kind of the recipe, the mental model that I use for collaboration. It's pretty straightforward. So the first step in any collaboration is the handshake. If you could do it in person, it's even better. So if you're going to start a collaboration, you want to have people co-located and start, building some of that glue that is not work-related. So having a relationship helps a lot de-escalate potential problems down the line. So same thing, if you're going to be onboarding a vendor or working with a different partner, if you're indie, do at least a video call today, but even better if you can meet physically and just talk and understand each other. This way, next time that you have a communication for that person, you're likely to see it in the best of light, right? So, words can go into flame wars, and sometimes you're reading it wrong. But when you know the person, you're going to tend to pick the version that, they had a good intention when they wrote that. So super important, the handshake. Then obviously defining the mandate. This looks silly, but a lot of people start collaboration and they don't define like when does this end, or what are the deliverables. So pretty standard practice to do that mandate. Again, if you can write the mandate or do that face to face, it's even better. When you go into the exchange mode, this is where you're producing things or collaborating or receiving things. This could be put offline. So you want to lower the face-to-face and make that more seamless. That could be just texting on Slack or just emails. At that point, you're exchanging material and you're reviewing that material, and you could lower that that phase in terms of communication. But that's where the work actually happened. So if you're exchanging and you're seeing that it's not working well, then you can walk back the cycle, right? You can go back. Maybe my mandate isn't well defined, right? Or maybe the friction is because two people don't like each other. Maybe they should have a handshake and go have a beer, as you do in Belgium, and do it there. And then you can walk back the steps. Landing is the part that I was talking about, that it's not free. So receiving the material or ending collaboration, wrapping it up, or hardening it. So you got to plan for that into your game cycle. Make sure that the different specialists are available to receive that part of the work, and then celebrate, right? So this is the part that we often forget. So once you do something, it's a good moment to celebrate, not just like post-mortem of like what went wrong, but there's a lot of stuff that goes right, and that sets the mental state for the next collaboration. I know you can watch the whole talk on the GDC Vault if you really appreciate that, but that's kind of the mental model there. So next lesson, it's kind of AC Assassin's Creed related. This one is sideways. So when I joined Unity, we were redoing the engine as we do every 2 Assassin's Creed. I don't know if that's still the recipe, but that was the recipe when I was there. And by redoing the physics engine back then, we brought it up to a physically based rendering standard. Today, we kind of take that for granted. If you pick an engine like Unreal Engine or Unity, both of them have this physically based rendering approach. But that really was revolutionary back then, because it standardized the way that we create art assets, and that we can walk from one game to another, or bring assets from a store, and all that standardization was really cool. But one of the things that it also brought is that it became super photorealistic, because suddenly we could really imitate like the light of day. And working on that game one evening, as you do in AAA, I had my computer open and in my house, and I had the game there, but nothing was moving. And my wife passed behind me, and she was like, "Oh, you guys have a really cool, Paris reference." And I was like, "This is not a reference. This is the game." And she was like, "Whoa!" So yeah, it's pretty cool. And then you get like people doing this kind of content creation where they actually print out a screenshot and photo match it with the location. So that was really something that I thought, after that, I thought, the graphics went up super high on every game, like on the AAA side. And we take it for granted today, but it was pretty revolutionary. So, doing things that are pretty is actually pretty easy. And it's even easier today, right? You could just open a scene in Unreal and just, steal some assets, kit bash them, and you'll get pretty good lighting. But behavior is hard. So that's the lesson. So all of this illusion of things will pop a little bit. Now you need to animate. You need to craft your meshes, rigs, and then you have to craft AI that has like the right intention. So anything that moves and has interaction is just much harder to do than making it pretty. And this is one of the lessons that, it's a takeaway. So when you're making your own game, if you're starting indie or even if you're starting like AAA, it's easy to get the illusion that the game is advanced because it looks good. You're going to get there really fast. But you have to plan much more time to make it believable when you're going to start interacting with it. Because there's so many systems that you're not seeing here that, it's running the crowd, the AI, they're trying to react, just the way that the material is all set up. And this asymmetry, comes in part because the tech behind it is not as mature. So we've reached a point where, graphics are super advanced, but we're still kind of behind the curve in terms of making that, believable motion, and even further behind on making believable intention. Now, there's big revolutions that are coming here. So I think like, AI and deep learning are making headways into our industry in big ways, where we could sort of just hijack the behavior or do, motion matching and things like that are pretty advanced techniques to make things more believable and sort of make things move and react that is on par with the graphics that we have now. But the lesson there is that, if you're making your game and you make it look good super fast, that's great, but plan ahead. It's going to take a long time to make it feel good and even longer to make it fun. It's all doom and gloom, but pretty easy. So you could always take advantage of that. So going sideways, after Assassin's Creed, I joined another team that was Rainbow Six. And by that point, I had spent like 9 years, working in engine teams at various degrees. And so engine teams are in big AAA studios are called system teams sometimes. They typically include tools, but might not, depending on where you work. And typically they exclude the graphics team. But that also could be part of that team. In my case, it was everything but the graphics team. So it's like just everything but the GPU. And one thing you learn when you work on engines, sort of ticking the clock, is that what makes the heartbeat of your game is super important. And I'll be talking about why this is even more crucial for multiplayer games. But essentially, the lessons here is really keep your finger on the pulse. Make sure that you can build your game, that you can play your game, that you can deploy your game. And this is all the boring stuff that nobody likes to do, right? You need to have source control. You need to have asset, like depots. You need to have a good workflow of how do you get these assets? How do you version your game? How do you build your game so that you could test it and that your designers have, a good flow time? And I would say this is even worth it if you're a solo dev, right? To put this in place so that you don't lose any of your work. There's a lot of tools out there to do that today. So, like Git is super accessible as an example for code. And then, there's Git LFS, let's say, just for your data. But very important to keep your finger on the pulse. And also think about your budgets, right? So, what kind of hardware you're going to be targeting, and then making sure that you can track that, and so that if you're building a mobile game, this becomes super crucial. But if you're making like a PC game, it's less involved, but you still have to sort of think ahead. So I know it's super boring, but at one point in your production, you need to put all of this in place, and this will become the heartbeat of your game, right? If when you're getting a build and you're saying, oh, there's a bug here, you have to know like what version of code and data and online, backend is that from, right? So otherwise, it's hard to understand how you're going to fix it. When you are, just solo dev or a few devs, it's pretty easy to keep track of that. And probably, the build machine is just a person building the game and checking it out. But it sort of gets much more important as soon as you hit like 10 people, let's say. That's kind of the bar where I saw that we had to actually put things in place. So that's Alex Wimet, is my technical co-founder, and that's his face of like, I got to set up a 4 server. That's also his toy room right there. So these are that's our tiny server room. Yeah, so we set up everything. We have like some cloud backup, but we also have some on-site data, and we have a Perforce instance there. So it's really important to think about that ahead of time. and to plan time into it. And it won't contribute to your game, but it will make game development much easier if you can produce stable builds or track, where you are. And as you're going to be pitching, if you're going to be pitching demos to publisher, you might do like a special version for them, and this is where you get nuts and crazy if you don't track, where did you hack and what's actually your stable build. So keep your finger on the pulse, invest in that little infrastructure. Even if you're a tiny team, it will pay off a lot down the road. And it will certainly pay off if you're going to be making a multiplayer game. So my multiplayer journey became with Assassin's Creed Unity. So Assassin's Creed Unity is the only co-op Assassin's Creed, and there's a reason for that. It's just super hard. So one of the big problems that we face with multiplayer in Assassin's Creed is that we did not have enough designer time. And why didn't we have enough designer time? Because the build wasn't stable enough. And remember, these are like giant teams. But if we had better hygiene and practices around that, we could have made it much better. So what happened is that the game was kind of unstable. People didn't play the co-op version. They played a single player version. So they would submit something and just break the co-op version. So playing at 2 were quite okay, and then 3 and 4 player was super hard. And because the designers did not have a lot of playtime at 4, all the 4-player missions did not have a lot of love in terms of iteration and polish, and it shows in the game. On launch, people played an average of 50 minutes of co-op. Even though it was a big fantasy and a big ask, they're still asking for it. If you look online, like is Valhalla going to have co-op? Is the next one going to have co-op? Probably not. And it makes QA much harder as well. So now instead of having 1 QA, you need 4, right? So each time you want to test your game, you need 4 players. And again, if you invest in your tools, you're going to automate that. You're going to create synthetic players for your designers to play against and with. So if you're going to do a multiplayer game, you have to be mindful that making things always playable and being much more strict on the quality of your build and slowing down submits, having everybody play the multiplayer version so that they don't break it is super important. It's very, very important. And these are lessons that we took to actually Rainbow Six Siege, which the one is still live today. So after shipping Unity, when I came on Rainbow, I was like, I am not doing that ever again. We're going to do something much better. And there were a whole bunch of people that were really aligned on that. So we went really strict. We said this has to be always playable. We have to meet a certain quality bar in terms of crashes per second, and we're going to be looking at that iteration time. So making sure that the designers, when they're introducing a new character or balancing a weapon, they could test it out right away and get that immediate feedback and tune. And because that game was, multiplayer first, and we did not have a campaign, it kind of helped get everybody in the right mindset to play the game multiplayer all the time. And we had, testers that were sort of ready to play test the game with anybody that wanted to test a feature for that game. Obviously, if you're going to be making a multiplayer game, and you're not a lot, what we do is that, we at my own studio right now, our game is multiplayer, and we do that. We make sure that we have playtime, that we have tools to sort of play against each other. But it's really important to play. So focus on our playtime and make sure that if you're going to be making a multiplayer game, think ahead of like all the stuff that you're going to need to produce that. It's a very different feeling than producing a single player game. But if you do, then you win because multiplayer games have much higher rate in terms of engagement. Whether it's co-op or PvP. So the payoff of making multiplayer games is pretty high. And that also gives a much longer lifetime to your game if you do it right. It can stretch that dollar and make your game sort of move on. It could also, if you're making an indie game, sort of distinguish you from the mass. So there's a lot of single player games and not that many multiplayer game. So if you could pull it off, there's a big payoff to do it. But it's hard, so plan. So that sort of approach of always playable for me, yes, there was a lot of tech involved, and Ubisoft certainly invest a ton of money into their tech in terms of build and dev environment and all of that. But the first thing is that for me, it's a mindset, and it's a hard mindset to get. So if you want to get into game as a service, whether on the mobile or PC side or console, it's really something that you have to think ahead, but not think ahead. You have to like shape your mind to it, right? And one of the key things here is to be always playable. So if you design your production cycle as a game as a service, meaning you're constantly improving your build, you're constantly playable, that's the quantity that's important, and that's kind of a mindset. So number one, be always playable and have that mindset. So get as quick as you can to like be able to play your game, and once you have that full cycle of playing your game, never let it go. Never let it that break under any circumstances, right? If you're good, you can write a unit test to sort of validate that you're not breaking things to try to go faster. And when we were on Rainbow, we sort of introduced this mean time before crash quantity. So as an example, you need to play 10 players. They need to play a 3-minute match without crashing. So that means, or any bug that will interrupt gameplay. So any one of these players have a bug, the whole session is not good, right? This is competitive 5 versus 5. So we treated that way. So you say 3 minutes, 10 players, you have to have 30 minutes minimum of mean time before you crash. And you can measure that when people are playtesting. And then, you put it, so that's like your minimum bar, and then you bring it to 100. And then when you're shipping, you bring it into the thousands. And that's kind of the quality bar that you're always ramping up. Because when your game is going to go live, that rare bug that never happens is going to happen to enough people to piss them off, and they're going to go on Reddit and destroy you. They will. So always playable. Make sure that you're constantly playing your game. Super important. Second one is you're going to be patching forever. So think about that. Your game is sort of a collection of patches that you keep improving, adding assets, adding different game mods, different features, and you have to prepare yourself for that. So what does that mean? Let's say you're even if you're a small game, you have to think about how is your data structured, right? And where does that live? If you're going to add a new skin, if you're going to add a new weapon, how is that going to scale well? So think about, you're doing like, right now you might have like 3 characters and 2 weapons or something like that. But then, how does that scale to 1,000, right? So plan for success. And, you might be updating that game forever. And some of those games run for a super long time, right? Siege is a good example of that. So making sure that you could patch your game, that it can scale well, and that your data is really well organized will really help you get into that mindset of sort of continuous delivery. So plan for it, because if you have success and you did not plan for it, then it's going to be really hard to sustain your audience, because they're going to want more. You're going to try to produce more, but it's going to be chaos. You don't know where to put it. You don't know how to you didn't plan for your game to be patchable. And the game as a service mindset extends beyond that as well. So after Ubisoft, I needed to change sort of air, and I went to Sydney, Australia, and joined a company called Wargaming. So they have a studio in Australia. And when I joined Wargaming, their main game is World of Tanks and World of Warship, World of Warplane. You see a pattern there. So they made their success with this sort of arena battles that are free to play, and on a massive scale. So it's like hundreds of millions of players. And over there, there was only one game and only one mindset, which was free to play arena. So it's a very different mindset. And in that mindset, you really treat your game as a platform. And, it's kind of a buzzword today, and other people are trying to do it like with Fortnite and whatnot. But when you have an audience and you have your game, you could decide to go down that route and be a game as a service, and it's a big payoff, right? So this is an example, is that instead of making, your game version 2, you're going to, introduce that second game as a game mod inside your game, right? Your players are already there. If you're making a second game, you're creating a lot of friction for them to like go and download or buy or get that game. your players are already joining your game. They're already logging in, weekly or daily. So they're there. Offer them just more value for that login and reward them with different game mods, events. And this is, treating like all of these experiments, inside your game as kind of like that game as a platform is super important. And that's kind of like the next level. If you can make it there, then you could sort of have that game and keep it rolling, upgrade the game, upgrade its visual, and build that community around that game, and sort of just keep giving them more and more stuff. And it works. And kind of an anti-example of that is, again, I'm going to take Rainbow. So in Rainbow, they did a mod that was called Fury, and it worked pretty well. It was kind of like that sort of alien mod. But then, down the line, they made a full game out of it and called it Extraction, and that did not work because the players are trying to play, Siege. That should have stayed a game mod as an example. And you're just creating extra friction, and people don't understand, which game they need to buy, so there's product confusion. But yeah, game as a service is that mindset, and if you want to push it, think of your game as just an entry point. Now that you have the attention, it's the attention economy that we're in of your players. How do you keep them engaged with different gameplay, different mods, different events? And I know an example of that is the Tank Commander mode that I worked over there from the Sydney studio. And but that's a different lesson here, right? So once you get into sort of that live service game, there's also another sort of mindset that you could borrow from first fire bullets, then Cannonball comes from a great book called From Good to Great. I recommend you entrepreneurs a good read. But yeah, the idea here is that instead of making, for your game idea number 2, instead of making it a full game, why not design that, as an event and get this in the hands of players as quickly as possible. Obviously here, we're working with World of Tanks, so we have an already existing audience. But I think this applies a lot to indie games as well. Like, can you get that first iteration on your laptop in a cafe and show people and see, their reaction? What is that minimum nugget that you can build to test out your idea, right? Is this fun? Is this sticky? And then try different little mods. For Tank Commander, this was the idea to have one player play as an RTS. So, World of Tanks is sort of 15 versus 15 player or 7 versus 7 players in competitive mode. And on console, it's 7 versus 7. So for that competitive mode. And here, what if one of the players play as an RTS? So instead of having just one tank, it controls all the tank on their side, but it's playing against players. So that was like the gameplay question, right? And, they had the firepower. They could have just, build a giant team and just do it and launch it. But we went with this little iterative approach before doing that. So, we built out a prototype internally. When it was sort of fun enough, we decided, okay, which SKU is going to be the most. They didn't want to sort of go too wide, so we chose to do it on console. Even RTS on console it's a really different game beast. But we did it because the audience was smaller and we could control the message more and get the feedback. And then we designed that as an event, just a weekend event. If you played more than 3 games, you get your reward. So a lot of people played it just to get the reward and then play the main game. But that was enough to give us feedback on just the plumbing, like, this is asymmetric matchmaker, like would the matchmaker take it, would that improve numbers and things like that. So you can start getting numbers, getting metrics, understanding, getting player feedback. And then, that went from a weekend to a full week to a game mod on console. And now they're experimenting that on PC. So it's called the, I think the strategist mode. So that's kind of one way that you can sort of roll an event, go for an event to a game, and at each time sort of get that player validation that, there's an appetite for this, and that you're not just blowing a ton of money into thin air and then hoping, like a spray and pray kind of thing. So, because the reality is that you can fire a lot of bullets, but you most likely only have one cannonball, right? So giant companies have more than one cannonball. They have like a whole stack of them. But, at the indie scale, we mostly only have one moment where, we're going to throw it all. And so make sure that, you're going to hit something with that cannonball. So first, fire bullets. Get that minimum nugget right in front of players. Get that loop going. And then fire cannonball and build that Belgium scene. All right. So last but not least, there's no perfect time to start. So by this time, it's 2020. I've been 4 years in Sydney, and I had a great time. But by the end of 2019 in Sydney, we had like massive forest fires, right? So that was like first thing, forest fires. And then in that January 2020, there were floods right after the forest fires. And after the floods came the pandemic. So it was kind of 2020 was a great year. And, for different reasons, I had to make my way back to Montreal. So the question was there of like, what's next? What do I do? And the idea that of starting a studio, always had been around with me and my co-founders. So we decided to put that into action. And, there's just no great moment. We were always waiting for that moment. And there's a reason why I started this at, 40 years old. It's because before, it was like, oh, my kids are too young, or, I'm in a different country, or, you always have a good reason, right? I want to pay my house or something like that. And there's just no good moment, right? If you start young, you get, you're foolish enough to go into this, like, it's going to be easy. And the joke goes that, when you start and you don't have that much experience, you take a sabbatical of 1 year to ship your game, and 5 years later you're done. But it's kind of true. So you have the advantage of being foolish and not knowing that it's super hard, so you can do it, and that's why you succeed. When you have experience and you're cushy, you have like the opposite, right? You have all the experience, you know how to ship games, but you have mortgages and a family, and you have obligations. So it's really sort of a hard proposition of like, yay, let's take all our life savings, start a studio, and not take a pay for a year. So it's a different proposition, but there's no good proposition, right? So it's just like time it well for you, but don't wait for the perfect time, because you'll never do it. And that's kind of my lesson. I think that Nike, just stole that, but it's that, right? Just do it. It's scary, even for a person like me. I'm sure the guys at Yellow Brick as well. Like you have a ton of experience, and then you're starting this new thing, and it's just super scary. And it shouldn't be, but it is, and it is for everyone. So we do it. It's we're 2020. We have this idea, and I'm still doing consulting work to sort of float things. So we start 3, full pandemic. So that's the bottom picture. Alex, Catherine, and Denny. And we start literally from home. That we don't have any office, and even like Alex is in his pajamas all the time. So, and then, we sort of graduate in 2021. We decide to go full-time and make pretty team pictures. So that's the one with the brick wall. So we started a small team. Again, we're self-funded and bootstrap on that picture. We have nice smiles, but we're pretty nervous about what we're doing. And then, we eventually, in last March, got VC funding. So we went a different route and build the rest of the current team, which is that super cool picture there on the top left. And so that's our current team. And then we moved out of my apartment, because we were all in my apartment for a while. And now we have, a place and a team. And we have a team of 11. And we build a vertical slice of our core gameplay. And that's based out of all the lessons that I showed you. So it's no perfect time to start, but we did it. You guys can do it as well. We're making on Wars, so it's a turn-based strategy game, sort of pushing the boundaries on collectibles, and we're sort of marrying that with wargaming gameplay. So that's what we do. And but not here to sell the game, just here to give you lessons and ask your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this really technical expertise and for sharing fine-tuned lessons and takeaways. Do we have questions or reactions? Go ahead. Do we have students that have some questions? Entrepreneurs? Yes. Let me join you.
Thank you. So you mentioned that you should first fire your bullets, then your cannon. So in a smaller team, like let's say you start the event, right? And you need to get a lot of data. In today's world, you can get all the data you want. How do you decide which metrics to prioritize and what kind of data you would want? Because obviously time is limited and you also need to filter in all the data, and it's, you know, the more data you get, the more you need to structure and everything. So how do you decide like what priority to put on? What's the most important to you? And what should the player actually be doing and where they can get that from?
Yes, so that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if this is working. Okay, yeah, it's working. Good. Yeah, so that's a good question, right? And the temptation here is just to try to measure everything and then hope you have enough data to answer your questions. The trick is to design your questions ahead of time, right? So what are you trying to answer with this build, right? What do you want to, what is the, if you had like, one or three questions that you must answer, and then, what kind of metric you need to answer those questions. Everything else will be sort of bonus. So, if you're making a game and you're doing a playable and it's about your core loop, then, you want to understand, like, is your core loop fun? Then you're going to design the metrics for that. So playtime, repeat plays and things like that will be the type of metrics that you want, right? Some of the metrics that you can't get automatically, you can only get through a questionnaire. So that's also something that you can think of designing. Most players won't answer your survey unless you pay them. But from time to time, you'll get good insights from that, just out of wider playtest.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering, how do you go about deciding what kind of, so it's like your first game with the studio, how did you decide on the idea or the concept for that? Did you try like many different things, or did you say, this is the one we want to build?
That's a great question, and I actually have a slide because of that. So I don't know if this is going to work. It's a video. Okay, it doesn't work. Okay, so I'm just going to talk. No. Can you click on the video? No. All right. Maybe it's going to work. All right, so there was an internal, so the guys that went to UB might remember this, but there was an internal sort of trailer for like a mood and context board for Assassin's Creed 3. And they filmed this and had built like an entire diorama and filmed that, so to just get the context mood of that game. And, I was on that receiving end of the trailer and just looking at this, and I thought, this is amazing. Like, we should make a game that has this look, right? And I thought at first that they had made all of this in CG. Because what we don't see, this is just a making of, but they had like these little scenarios, and then it pulled out, and then you have like the Templars that are sort of manipulating the soldiers. And I thought it was so cool that I wanted to make a game like that. But nothing was really ready or there for that. So the first piece of the puzzle was, when we went to physically based rendering, I was like, okay, now we have graphics good enough to capture that diorama art style in a realistic way. But then there was different things, like the business model didn't work well with the type of games that you can make with miniatures and things like that. So collectibles. So for me, the other piece of the puzzle was the business model. So when I got exposed to like live games and free to play and like collection and like forever games, I thought, okay, now we have something that's sort of closer to that kind of experience that I wanted to make. That these forever games like Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer, that kind of game, right? So for me, that was like the other piece of the puzzle that was sort of missing. So bringing those two things together of like this powerful model, and then the third piece that we were kind of not waiting, but it was a sign, is that games today and younger generations even more, people got used to free to play and got used to owning digital assets. So so for us, it was the right moment to sort of take that entire hobby and to make it digital. So to operate the same transformation that collectible card games have gone, like Magic the Gathering, have gone digital, but to do it for miniature gaming. And we're starting with a war game, but the vision was really about that art style and owning and collecting, digital assets and playing with them in different games and different game mods. So the same asset can play many different games. So all those keys were like moments happened, and this is where we said, okay, we have everything set up. Let's just try it. But yeah, we actually had a paper and pen version of a war game like in 2017, and that got us. Then we digitalized that on our free time, and that it wasn't fun enough. Like rolling virtual dice is fun like 3 times, and then it gets really boring. So that got us to say, okay, no, we're actually making a video game. So experiment like that will sort of help you not invest in things and kill things early on. Yeah.
We have room enough for 1 or 2 questions. If you need to talk a little bit further, I think you will be available after the presentation. So do not hesitate to contact Liko-Paul, and thank you very much again for being our guest today. Please join me in welcoming again today in Charleroi with a big applause.
Merci.
So again, we'll take a very short break, 1 or 2 minutes.